Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us Mr. Jayant Sinha, a member of Lok Sabha on behalf of BJP, also member of Standing Committee on Finance and Public Accounts Committee. A lot of responsibilities in Parliament. Welcome to our show, Mr. Jayant Sinha. You've been a first-time member of Parliament, and before that, you have a very interesting background. You've been an engineer from IIT. You've been a partner at McKinsey, you've been a strategic consultant, you've been an investor. So I guess in some ways you represent the new professionalized face of the BJP under Modi, Mr. Modi as Prime Minister. What do you read with such a varied experience that you've had in India and abroad? How do you read BJP's economic philosophy today under Mr. Narendra Modi? I'll tell you why I'm asking you this question, because Mr. Modi, the perception is that he has a two-track economic philosophy, as it were. One, where he talks about Gandhi, Lohia, Deen Dayal Upadhyay, and the other, he talks also about global capitalism, India's engagement with globalization and global capital. These two, they seem apparently contradictory, but how do you read the economic philosophy of the BJP?
Well, thank you very much, Venu. It's wonderful to be here on this program, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to engage with you on these very important topics. I think you ask a great question, which is how would you summarize the BJP's economic philosophy, particularly in light of our engagement with the global economy, and capitalism and markets and everything else that goes with that, as well as, of course, our traditions, which are Gandhian, which are from Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay and so on. How do you reconcile all of that? It's a great question, and I think we have a wonderful answer for that. It's in fact encapsulated in the slogan that we used for the elections and continues to be the guiding principle for us, which is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, right? And what that's basically saying is that we believe in prosperity for all, right? And as we've said, and I myself said in Parliament, our focus is not on empty entitlements that you are not able to deliver. Our focus is really in providing the opportunities, the resources, and the empowerment to people so that they can make better lives for themselves. So, Sabka Saath, so help everyone, Sabka Vikas. So, you bring development and the fruits of development to everyone. Now, how do we do that? And I think the Finance Minister did a wonderful job in Parliament explaining that in his budget and in his subsequent interviews post the budget, and as he's been doing recently as well, where he says that, we are a pro-business party. And we are pro-market as well. And because we are a pro-business party, because we are a pro-market party, we can in fact do what any government in India must do, any compassionate person in India must do, and particularly people like us that subscribe to a Gandhian, Deen Dayal Upadhyay view of the world, which is really to be able to make sure that those who are the most vulnerable in our society, those who are in the most need in our society, have the resources to live a much better quality of life. And it is really, so a lot of people see this as a trade-off, but it's not. In fact, it's a very false way of setting that up.
So you're saying there is no trade-off?
There is none at all. In fact, unless you have growth, unless you create opportunity for people, you're not going to help the poorest of the poor, the last person in line, which is Gandhiji's statement where he said, I cannot rest. And we've said that as well.
Yeah, we cannot last rest. Man, the poorest tier,
the last tier in the last person's eye has to be wiped out. Until then, we cannot rest.
So you're saying that, so you endorse Mr. Narendra Modi's line, which he, if you remember, expounded when he, after becoming PM, he was addressing members of Parliament of BJP, where he said that Sarkari Khazana garibon ke liye hai. So you're saying that has a Gandhian this thing to it.
No, it's very clear. It's very clear. नहीं, प्रधानमंत्री जी ने कहा है कि ये गरीबों की सरकार है और हर कोई सरकार हिंदुस्तान में गरीबों की होनी चाहिए, because they are the ones who are in the most need, and therefore it is our moral responsibility, and this is where the economic aspects are a happy sort of merging of the moral responsibility as well as the most effective way to do it. The moral responsibility is that the role of the government is to ensure that there is no suffering. There's no deprivation in this country. It's the moral responsibility of all civilized societies, of all governments around the world. So that is a moral responsibility, and that is a Gandhian responsibility, as I said, Upadhyayji's responsibility. At the same time, the best way for us to discharge that moral responsibility, the best way for us to be able to provide those resources to the poor is to ensure that our economy does as well as possible. If our economy is doing well, first and foremost is creating jobs and as well as growing well and doing well, then it will create the resources and the sort of the wealth and the tax revenues that will enable us to serve the poor. But we have to start with, as exactly as the Prime Minister said, is that our overriding priority has to be able to ensure that the 40-45% of India that is below the poverty line, depending on how you look at it, right, get the resources and the opportunities that they need to make a better life for themselves. And everything is designed around that. Our government.
So you're saying that that will be the primary focus of the government?
It has to be
50% of people.
As I said, it depends on which
bottom 50%,
which poverty line that you use. There are many different ways of doing it.
Poverty line doesn't make sense because even if you take 50% of the people, bottom 50 or 60%, they would be less than 100 rupees a day per person.
We have a lot of poor people in India, no matter how you look at it. And it is our moral responsibility.
In fact, 80% of the people are less than 100 rupees a day.
It's a moral responsibility to ensure that we do whatever we can to provide them the resources and the opportunities to build a better life for themselves.
And tell me, how do you, if you do a reading of, say, Gandhi or even Deendayal Upadhyay or Lohia, how do you sort of see them? Do you see them as anti-capitalism, or do you see them as people who support capitalism if it has the potential to transfer resources to the very poor?
No, I think the way we have to look at a lot of Indian philosophy and a lot of deep thinking that's happened in Indian society is to see it from a dharmic point of view, right? Which is एक राज धर्म होता है. राज धर्म में क्या होता है कि जो हमारे समाज में जो सबसे लाचार लोग हैं, जो सबसे मतलब लोग कठिनाई में हैं, तकलीफ में हैं, जहाँ गरीबी है, वहाँ हम लोगों को उनको सहयोग और समर्थन देना है. ये हमारा धार्मिक एक परंपरा है. So we have to respect that. That is very, very
integral. So the society has to respect that.
That is, Deendayal Upadhyay ji has said in his integral humanism that this is what has to drive us and to animate us. And so certainly that is almost a dharmic moral responsibility, which is why I use that word. Now, as I said, the happy fact is, that the only way we can do that is to ensure that we have a globally competitive, open economy that is thriving and flourishing, creating jobs and tax revenues. That's the only way we can fulfill those responsibilities. And that is that. So there is no contradiction there. In fact, that is the way to do it. There's perfect alignment. Now, we have to look at it, you were saying earlier, two-track. I wouldn't call it two-track. I would say that there are two very important priorities for the government, two very important pillars on which our government's activities rest, and which is where our economic philosophy comes in. Which is that if you look at the economy, and we have to build an open, competitive global economy, that's where the role of the government is very important in terms of a provider of public goods, in terms of a provider of law and order, in terms of a facilitator, as a regulator, etc.
So you feel that the state also needs to scale up in a qualitative way?
Well, one of the big challenges that we do have in India is a lack of state capacity. And that is both in terms of the actual number of people on the ground, and I'll give you some facts on that, as well as in terms of the skills of government itself. Now, if you look at the number of people in the ground, we have 600 and odd districts. We have 4,500 IAS officers. On average, in one district, we have 1.5 IAS officers that stay there
very low by any standards.
Which stay there for 18 months on average and have to deal with at least 66 government
Similarly,
schemes.
police officers, teachers,
There are
health workers.
vacancies across the board are around 25, 30, 40%.
So even World Bank has said that per capita availability of health workers,
everywhere
teachers,
we go.
law
So there's a
and order
tremendous lack of
providers
state.
is very low in India.
So as far as state capacity, public goods are concerned, we have to really strengthen that, reinforce that, because the state has to fulfill its responsibilities. Very important fact. Very important fact to realize is that tax revenues in India as a percent of GDP is 10%. 10%. That is among the lowest in all major economies.
Why is that?
Well, I think we have to do.
Do you think Indians are not paying taxes?
Well, I think there are many factors. Every finance minister wants to work on this.
Self-employed Indians
has to work on it. So we don't have a large organized sector, and that's part of the reason why tax collections are as low as possible. We don't have the GST in place. So we have to fundamentally think about tax reform in India so that we can increase tax to GDP. But only if we increase tax to GDP is the state going to be able to deliver more and deliver it efficiently. So, as I was saying earlier, when it comes to the open, competitive global economy, we have to provide the public goods, we have to provide the state capacity, we have to provide the enlightened regulation so that economy can flourish. While we are doing that, at the same time, we have to ensure that whether it's direct benefits transfer, whether it is schemes being run very efficiently without leakage, whether it is a very good, sharp identification of the people who are in need, we really, on the welfare side, run a 21st century world-class welfare state as well.
So you're saying that you need to parallelly run good capitalism and a good welfare system together simultaneously.
That's right. And that's right. And by the way, there's nothing new or rocket science in what I'm saying. This is what, all the
like you see in Europe, some of the welfare state in Europe, they follow market policies.
Yeah, and so really the debate today, and you said obviously that I've had long experience overseas as well as in India. The debate today, and we in India have to be part of that debate, and we have to understand how our state itself is going to evolve. The real debate globally right now is, what is the role of the state versus the market economy versus what you have to do on the welfare side. It is that trilemma that we have to work out.
It's very interesting. We'll come back to this discussion, but after a small break.
Sure.
Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are talking to Mr. Jayant Sinha, member of Lok Sabha, and he speaks for the BJP on economic matters. So, Mr. Sinha, we were talking about, very interestingly, you were saying that the capitalism, market-led economic growth and a welfare state, there's not any big contradiction in the two. They can be run together, right? Now, in all the debates that we've had over the last 10, 15 years since reforms began in India, there's one issue which has remained unresolved as to the sequencing, whether welfarism follows growth, which some economic philosophers say, like Jagdish Bhagwati, and there are others who say, no, in a poor country like India, welfarism cannot wait for economic growth, which very interestingly Mr. Narendra Modi in his UNGA speech had articulated recently, UN speech, where he said that basic drinking water, clean drinking water, sanitation for 1.5 billion people cannot wait for economic growth to happen. So, in a sense, Mr. Modi pitched himself in the camp which says that no, as far as welfare for the very poor is concerned, you really cannot wait for growth to happen. It has to happen simultaneously, or maybe the state has to intervene. So, how do you see that?
No, I think it's a fascinating debate, and it's a debate economists love to have. From a practitioner's perspective, both in terms of what I've done in my professional life as a business person, as an investor, and then as a political person who is out on the front lines every day and traveling in the villages of my constituency and listening to people, I find it a somewhat theoretical discussion. The reality is, as all practitioners will tell you, it's not black or white. There's a staging that has to happen. There's a spiral that we have to go through. Obviously, we have to do things in terms of building the capabilities and capacity of our people. At the same time, we have to ensure that the economy also grows. And it's all a matter of sequencing and staging. It's not black or white. There are no, simple rules that say, oh, now just invest, 500,000 crores purely in welfare schemes and don't do anything for economic growth. Of course, you have to do a lot of things for economic growth. Of course, there are things you need to do as far as welfare is concerned. And it is that staging and sequencing is what really demonstrates the art of the possible. The finance minister correctly said the reform is the art of the possible. Governance is the art of the possible as well. Running a business is the art of the possible. So we have to move away from what I would say are fairly sterile academic debates that play well on the front pages of the newspaper, but really don't have any meaning when you're running a business or you're running a government. We have to do both.
But Mr. Modi is a practitioner, so how do you read that?
Yes, so Modi, the Prime Minister is doing it exactly right. You can see he's doing both together, right? We are talking about Make in India. We are doing the diesel price deregulation. We are opening up coal mining. We are talking about land acquisition and labor, which are very difficult issues. So we are making it easy to do business.
And then on the welfare side,
and then on the welfare side, we are working on, a clean India. We are working on a skill India, because the two go hand in hand. Jan Dhan, all of that. So ultimately, if you ask me about economic philosophy, I said Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. There again, it encapsulated Sabka Saath. That means we have to absolutely build everybody's capabilities and do it for everyone. And Sabka Vikas, we have to work as far as the economy is concerned. Ultimately, if you step back, the fact is we have to build India's productive capacity. Sure. That is our central and most important priority. Because you build India's productive capacity, and I don't just mean it in terms of infrastructure or factories or services sector. I also mean it in terms of human capital.
And how do you do it without widening inequalities?
No, but that's precisely what you have to do, is that and that is in fact...
current evidence is that inequality, even in the West, has been growing. Advanced stage capitalist societies are showing huge widening of...
Yes, and I think that's a very serious matter that you have to deal with, whether you're in a developing economy like India or Brazil for that matter, where you have very seriously higher levels of inequality, or in the West where, Piketty's book Capital, etc.
Exactly,
there's a raging debate, and, Janet Yellen, who's the federal governor, came out and spoke about...
So how much is Piketty's book relevant to India?
It is relevant. The reality is it is relevant, because and there we go into the construction of the tax system, how the tax system has to be set up, and I will give you a very, very clear example of that, as well as what are societal norms. I think, again, coming back to the issue of our dharmic responsibilities and the Raj Dharma, we cannot have a situation in our society where we have this incredible gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's fine to get rich. It's fine to be wealthy.
But you have to reduce that gap.
But, we cannot have a situation where people are dying in the streets. Where our people cannot get health care.
So do capitalists have some responsibility
also? Of course they do. Of course they do. And then we come, yes, they do. And I think you'll see a lot of people in the West talking about it. We should be having the same discussion in India. And I want to raise a matter there, which is, let's talk about estate duties, right? Inheritance tax. We don't have any inheritance tax in India. It's a very controversial matter, but that is one way of reducing. Because you see, the power of compounding is very powerful. If you had ₹1,00,000 rupees in 1900, you'd have hundreds of crores of rupees in 2000, right? Because of the power of compounding. So if we want to create a society where there's opportunity for everyone, where there's a level playing field for all of our young people, we have to think about our tax system.
It might go with the anti-dynasty political philosophy of BJP.
We have to, obviously, you have to study it very closely. In the US, for example, there's an exemption of $5 million, so that most people are not within the purview of that. It only pertains to a few very wealthy families and so on. But I think, something like that would be very healthy for India, because I think it'll get people to think of themselves not as people who own assets into perpetuity, right? But owning assets as trustees, as stewards of society's resources.
That's what I think Narendra Modi spoke about in the conference that you had organized, a global investors conference, where he said in one word, his economic philosophy was trusteeship. He used a Gandhian term.
So, I mean, I think...
So how do you create a trusteeship-based economy?
And I think it was very wise and enlightened of the Prime Minister to demonstrate his very deep thinking about many of these matters, to use that word. Because that's a very powerful
Especially in regard to resources like spectrum, coal, water.
Yes, exactly right. So I think we all, again, it comes back to our dharmic ethics. The sense of dharam, the sense of Raj Dharam comes back to the way, Atalji used to talk about it, the way Deen Dayal Upadhyay ji used to talk about it, and so on. Which is that all of us all of us, and you can see that through the actions of the Prime Minister himself, all of us has to see ourselves as trustees and stewards of this great nation and this great civilization. You know, and as stewards and as trustees, it is our moral responsibility. Right? It is our moral responsibility to leave this civilization, this country, better off for the next generation. And so we always have to ask ourselves, which is, what are we doing with the opportunities we have, the resources that we have? Are we leaving a better civilization, a better country for our people?
So basically you're reading Gandhi, or the PM reads Gandhi in the context of trusteeship, essentially.
Yes, yes, which is that, you know, at the end of the day, just as Hindi mein kehte hain ki kafan mein jeb nahi hote. You know, you're not taking anything with you when you go. So you have to leave it behind. And if you leave it behind, you don't want to deplete that bank account, right? You want to build up the bank account and leave more for the next generation, because that's how humanity has progressed. That is our dharam. That is our moral responsibility.
So tell me, Jayant, how is BJP's economic policy framework? You've been describing it in very articulately, but how is it different from the one followed, say, in the last, say, 15 years? Forget about the last 3 years of policy paralysis. I'm saying before that, the UP also claimed that it was following a policy of market economics as well as welfare state. In fact, UP was being accused of too much of welfareism. It got 8.5% growth through the decade of the between 2002 and 2010. If you leave aside the last 2-3 years, 8.5%, 9% growth. During this period, according to BJP's own analysis, employment absorption was very subpar, very minimal. You know, if you had to absorb 10 million people coming to the labor market every year, to absorb that number, actual absorption was less than a third of that, probably 2.5 million, maybe even less. So BJP, in its manifestos, and some of your other party leaders have been talking about this. What change can you bring about, structural change, to change the situation? Because it's now very clear that 9% growth is not absorbing enough employment in the industry sector. I mean, are we seeing this phenomenon of jobless growth? Probably Brazil, you spoke about other developing economies are facing similar problems, because high technology-driven growth today is not absorbing enough jobs in the manufacturing. So
yeah, no, I think those are great questions. Those are excellent questions. I'm an engineer by training, right? So I spend a lot of time thinking about causes and effects, inputs and outputs, right? The problem with the UPA government, and it's very clear, you know, all economic analysts, anybody who has an understanding of Indian economic history is quite damning in their sort of assessment of what the UPA did. And let's focus on the inputs then, right? What were the inputs? The inputs were that the UPA did nothing as far as economic reform is concerned. Nothing. In fact, they saddled the government with a series of very expensive welfare programs. And lo and behold, when the economy softened and a number of things happened because the economy couldn't sustain, because there were no inputs, there was no economic reform.
But you still got 9% growth, right?
But I'm explaining that. Again, let's not confuse inputs and outputs. The output was growth. The input was all based on what the NDA government had done when it left power in 2004. When the NDA government left power in 2004, the economy was growing at 8.5% a year. We were running a current account surplus, and the budget deficit was coming down to 2%. That's what, and we had done a lot of heavy lifting, you know, in a whole host of sectors.
But how do you change it now?
Construction. No, so that was what we left behind for the UPA government. The UPA government then coasted on that, on the investment cycle for several years, did extremely well till the global financial crisis came along. But as everyone tells you, you don't fix the roof when it is raining. You fix the roof when the sun is shining. When the sun was shining on the UPA government between 2004 and 2008, because of the hard work that the BJP government had done previously, they did nothing. Right? That is the
So what structural change can you bring now?
Lots of them, and we're doing it as we speak. So that's what the UP did. The input was nothing, but the output was based on what had happened with an economic lag. They enjoyed it. Therefore, when the economy started to go south and has gone really, really far south, and in fact they've left us with the worst economy in 25 years, whether it's growth, whether it's current account deficit, whether it's inflation, on all of those dimensions. So now we are inheriting a situation like we inherited in '98, where the economy is in a ditch. right? And we have to do a tremendous amount of work, not just to
Global
fix...
factors are also responsible.
Well, I mean, de minimis. I mean, yes, they were there, but you could go from 8 to 7%, not from 8 to below 5%, right? So that's the situation. So we have to do a tremendous amount of work now, not only in terms of getting past the macroeconomic challenges that we are facing right now, but, and this is very important, and
Microeconomic,
I emphasize this in many of my discussions, is that we also have to fix a lot of the institutions. Why do we have a problem with the coal block situation?
Sure.
Why? So because I think more than 150 coal blocks were allocated during the UPA time willy-nilly, with no transparency, no methodology. So now we have to deal with that mess.
So institutional reform is also...
So we have to do, in parallel, we have to fix these institutions. We have to deliver economic growth. And you correctly pointed out the biggest challenge facing India right now
employment
is jobless growth.
Employment.
We have an incredible jobs crisis.
That would be your biggest challenge. Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Jayant Sinha. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.